Alrighty in. Let's go with take two. Hi, this is Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master Soapbox, and I'm your host. And we'll be doing as we usually do, talking about a bunch of subjects. And I've put together a list of them here on the screen. And if we have anywhere near the kind of luck that we had yesterday, we probably won't be operating with just this list. We may end up with a whole lot of other things that we're going to end up talking about. But in the meantime, I do want to thank you for taking the opportunity to join us. We are going to be talking about the NycosRPG's quantum die rolling mechanism. We're going to look into the evolution of how that process was developed and why that mechanism shook itself out, so to speak, of the process. We're talking about the practical uses of QDR in a game turn resolution for any game out there, and how, therefore, it is a much more broadly useful element than just a game mechanic. And we're going to talk about the open world and infinite options that QDR actually represents. In the creation process, I never thought about what could shake out of it. And I have to say, I'm really excited about what this opens up. And I think by the time we get done with our conversation this evening, you'll see why it matters and why it might be useful. And then we'll talk about how the QDR, how the quantum die rolling mechanism fits into Nykos's overall RPG plans and what's going on beyond just the Dark Shards system that's currently available. And at the end, before we're done for the evening, we will talk about how to get your copy of Dark Shards system book, the main document that has all the rules necessary to play the Nykos RPG in the the fantasy setting, or Dark Shards. So, with all of that, I want to thank you. If you're already with us, that's great. Feel free to drop a hello or whatever in the chat so that I know who I'm speaking with. I prefer to take on a more of a dialogue rather than a monologue over time. I do definitely want to get through the points of this outline here. Yesterday we went far afield. We started off in one direction and ended up going a completely different way, and that's okay. That's the way conversations work. But of course, it meant that there were a lot of people that were looking at the outline going, but you haven't talked about any of this stuff that's on the list there. So I will probably be redoing that show again in the future with those particular points. But today we're going to be talking about the quantum die rolling mechanism for NycosRPG. And for those that are unfamiliar with the concept of what I'm speaking about when I say a quantum die rolling mechanism, first we have to have an understanding of what the term quantum is being used for. As you may know, the concept of quantum mechanics follows from the concept that the experimentation has determined that the nature of electrons, among other things in the universe, are deterministic, and that we really can't know what their state is until we observe them. And when we observe them, then we understand their state, but we may not know how they arrived there. So the idea here is that, generally speaking, an electron can be many places at once until it's defined as being in one. And then once it's defined as being in one, then that's the only place it is, and it can't be anywhere else. So the concept here, therefore, is that if we think about die rolling, and I hesitate to say it this way because it's going to sound so pedantic, or I'm not looking down my nose at people for their attitudes about it. But when we look at a die rolling mechanism in any game out there, whether it be the D6s necessary for rolling in Warhammer 40k, or it's the D20s rolled in Dungeons and Dragons, or it's the percentage dice that are rolled in Call of Cthulhu, all of them have a targeted number for success. And in all of those cases, the die roll mechanism, and this is for the most part, there are some that may have a variance, but generally speaking, they have a threshold for success. And the die roll mechanism simply is choosing what that scale is. Saying where that threshold is. That means that if you're rolling a 6-sided dice and you need to roll a 4 plus, that means you know that if you roll a 4, 5, or a 6, you have succeeded, and on a 1, 2, or 3, you don't. Real simple, right? But that's fundamentally the only way people have looked at dice for as long as I've been alive, and probably longer than that. The idea has always been roll a dice against a target, and if you roll above the target, you succeed. And what's particularly useful for using the 20-sided die is the 20-sided die. The sides each represent what is mathematically considered to be a statistical significance. So each side is 5% of the whole. Well, that realization led to, therefore, a scaling table where your ability to successfully hit an opponent was a arbitrary measure between what your roll is to hit and the armor level of the opponent, and therefore if you overcame their armor, your hit was successful. And it's been that way forever. And when I was first looking at changes in the way we play role-play games, it was a realization that one die roll doesn't have to only generate one result. Now, of course, we know that if there's 20 sides on a die, you can roll it, as many times as necessary to get the statistics to fall out to show the average number of die rolls are going to leave, every side having the same odds. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the idea that one roll can actually give you 5 different potential responses, and maybe more. The idea, therefore, is in comparison with quantum dynamics, the idea that a laser fired at a grid is going to generate an equal distribution of electrons across that space, but they're going to be banded based on how many of them ended up in each discrete location. So in this case, we're looking at a percentage dice roll, and we are looking at each die roll generating a dispersion. And that dispersion is going to be scalar. So, for example, let's take the most basic. If you have a 5% chance of success, a 5% chance, then from that 5% chance, within the NycosRPG, you're generating 5. So the first you will generate will be a failure. And that's anything over the bracket of success. And that bracket of success, we're going to explain the differences here in a minute. But there's failure. And then there's a perfect roll. And a perfect roll on the other end of the spectrum would be a 0-1. 1% out of 100 is arguably the best roll for any character in any situation. If you roll a 0-1, you have gotten that 1 in 100 really significantly unique position. And that number doesn't change whether you have a skill that's incredibly high or incredibly low. That 1% will always be the perfect roll. Then, as I said, the top end would be failure, which is above the threshold. So what's the threshold? Well, the threshold comes off of the other 3 locations. Right in the middle would be the success. And this is what we think of when we talk about a Dungeons and Dragons die roll of needing a 15 or better. That, in this case, that would be that 15. Well, that 15 is an absolute success, but what if we create a window around that represents both partial success or wild success? And the idea is that, if you are targeting this, that's great, but rolling really low numbers when you've got a moderately high threshold is still a really cool, really important thing, because then statistically the number of chances of getting that number are lower. So you take the base value and you double it. And that doubled value is now the top success. Anything above that would be a failure. So again, if we're looking at the 5% chance, your double up value would be 10%. So 11 or higher would be a failure. And that gives you the top end of your window, which means you've given the person, the persona, 5% wiggle room for a partial success. And this has to do with the reality that whenever we do anything, we don't always do it right. If any of you have ever played golf, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can choose to play golf and get your golf clubs out and practice your swings and go to the golf course and set up your tee time, and even on your best day, you're not going to get perfect swings on every shot. You're going to get perfect swings once in a while, but that attempt to get the perfect leaves a lot of partial successes. And so this mechanism allows for that partial success. And the more skilled you are, the more likely you're going to get at least a partial success. On the other end of it, or down on the lower end, if you cut that number in half, so your 5 goes down to a 2.5, rounding up to a 3%, then a 1, 2, or a 3 on the percentage dice, well, actually a 2 or a 3 on the percentage dice, is going to be a wild success. And a wild success is getting more out of your answer, more out of the result than you expected. This is where your aim was spot on and your range was spot on, and the only thing that kept you from having the perfect answer or perfect solution was, I don't know, the surface of the cup. The idea here is, therefore, if you have a skill value of only 5%, then you have still 5 results. You have 11 and above, which is a failure. You've got 5 to 10, which is a partial. 6 to 10, which is a partial. Then you have 2 to 5, which is a standard or normal success. And then below the 2, you have the perfect success, the partial success. And then at the actually 1 itself, you have perfect. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each die roll gives you 5. So we can do some other math exercises so you'll kind of see what these numbers shake out to be. Let's say you have a skill value of 30%. 30% skill, 1 out of 3. That's fairly moderate. It's average person playing tennis, I suppose. You hit the ball back and forth. Okay, good job. That's 30%. You can adequately hold it. Well, that 30 would create a double up of 60 and a double down of 15. So 1 would be a perfect score. 2 through 15 would be a wild success. 16 through 30 would be a nominal or a straight success. And 31 to 60 would be a partial success. This gives you a way to scale the outcome of the engagement on a single die roll mechanism, measuring it against the person's skill to do whatever it is they're attempting to do. So if it's a skill contest, maybe there are no partials, like in certain circumstances. Like if you are picking a lock, there's no partially picking a lock. There's either it's unlocked or not. Therefore, you might add the wild success that you've opened the lock and figured out how it works or something like that. But generally, skills checks don't have as much to do with the partial or whatever. But when you talk about contests or you're talking about conflicts, both of those, you need to be able to get a relative value of success. So if I'm being pursued by an enemy in the game, then my chance to avoid capture or evade capture is going to be dependent upon a skill that I have, and that skill's value is going to set the 5 potential points for my success. And why that's important is that represents my effort in the game, and then when it's you that are responding to that, then your percentage roll is going to be against your skill at pursuit. And if your skill at pursuit is of, say, that same 35%, then the graduation will make more sense, because the relative success failure is a great way to measure who's got the upper hand in the conflict at an instantaneous and arbitrary moment in the combat. And fundamentally, it works, as I said, kind of like the way quantum theory works, is that once you look at the numbers, you can observe its relative position compared to another person's die rolls on that same scale, judging the openness or closeness of that scale by the skill level. So that's fundamentally how the mechanism works, and that's the thing we're going to be talking about today, is that this quantum die rolling mechanism is something more than just something to be used in a specific game. It's actually a different way of looking at die rolling in general. I can't tell you, since I started using it when I play standard Dungeons and Dragons 5e, every time I roll the dice, I'm thinking to myself, well, how would this work if I miss the die roll by some percentage, but we did have a scalar fashion, then I would have a partial success out of that die roll. And with that partial success, I would have some facet of interaction that we could look at in a comparative nature. So the evolution of the QDR, the reason why the quantum die roll mechanism evolved into existence, was quite often one of the biggest challenges to role-playing games is the combat slog, the back and forth that occurs in the role-play game when it comes down to determining success or failure in a combat situation. Generally speaking, characters in a role-playing game will gather a pool of hit points that becomes a barrier to their elimination in the game, and the longer they play, the greater that pool, the more difficult it is to challenge that player or make them feel the risks that a player would feel if there were no such defining risks. So therefore, we had to find a way to do a relative check. And at first it was, well, our percentage chance at success what is that? Does that measure success of the entire battle? Does it consist of the success in a 6-second period, or a 1-minute period, or a 10-minute period, or an hour? And all these possibilities churned around in there, and it finally came to me one day when we were doing a play test that we, as role players, are automatically thinking of our die rolls as a swing with our weapon. We're all automatically assuming the die roll represents a microscopic portion, a sliver of time, and our success or failure is rolled at that instant, and we are comparing it with the target number and making a decision about whether that attack succeeded or failed. But it felt like the old Flintstone cartoon, Barney Rubble's child Bam Bam, taking a big stick and just whacking at the opponent until either the opponent or Bam Bam is done. And that always felt kind of arbitrary, because that's not how normal people that get involved with conflict and combat act. You don't just keep punching somebody to make sure that you take away their ability to fight like that. And it just became painful. And so realizing instead that you could look at the answer to your question by changing the parameter of the question itself to give yourself more options, became like a huge light bulb clicked in my brain, and it was, oh my goodness. So how does this apply, you might ask, to game turn resolution? What are the practical uses for a quantum die rolling mechanism in a game? Well, let's take the simplest, would be something like a duel. Two people are going to attack one another with weapons of the same style and class, and they both have an equivalent skill as a given. Just work with me here. So if that's the case, let's assume that both of them have, as I've mentioned before, a 30% success rate. So with a 30% success target, that means both of them have a double up partial score of 60 and a double down number of 15. So with that, you can get all five. You've got the natural one, which is the perfect die roll. Then you've got the 2 up 2, and including the 15 as a wild success. Then you've got the 16 through 30 as your nominal or straight success. And then you've got 30 to 60 as your partial success. And then you have 61 and above as your failure. So if you were to grid this out, it comes out looking like this. You have a success of the highest level and a success of the highest level. The conflict continues, and both parties are exempt from fatigue because they both succeeded perfectly. The next step down is success perfectly, success at the wild success level and a success at the wild success level. Again, both of them are going to succeed, but because they both have a wild success, they would also not take any loss of fatigue because they are just that good. Next step down, they both have straight successes or nominal successes, in which case they both fought equally and they both have the same loss of fatigue because they are both strenuously supporting their position. Then down below that, you've got 2 partial successes. And 2 partial successes are just that. They're both getting more fatigue because it wasn't a full success. They don't get any extra fatigue because they did get a success out of it. And then finally, then the next down you come to the failures. And if they both fail, then there is no fatigue loss because the time simply didn't pass. They didn't actually accomplish anything in that period of time, but positioning each other. Then the next step would be to look at it from the standpoint of what if they are differenced. So if one gets a perfect success and somebody else gets a wild success, or they get a wild success and the opponent gets a nominal success or straight success. What do you do in those situations? And resolving those, then you're left with those situations where there's a 2-step variance between them. And then finally a 3-step variance between them where one person has success wildly succeeded and the other person has only partially succeeded. And having these different graduated potentials means that it's easier to narratively resolve the conflict in that turn. Now, since I'm doing this in a monologue instead of a dialogue, it's probably not making any sense. So I will have to probably repeat this presentation when I have an audience as well. But the point here is that the practical uses are that with a single die roll, players on either side of a conflict can determine where they stand on that relative success chart and therefore be able to see immediately whether they inflict a wound on their opponent, whether they choose to inflict a condition on the opponent or whatever. And so with that possibility, that potential, each die roll is a microcosm for the overall fight. And a success in this condition would be to invoke a condition upon the opponent, and the greater the success in relative position to the opponent determines how many conditions, up to 3 conditions, can therefore be posited against an opponent. Yeah, this is, without the real world examples and without players asking the proper questions, this feels a little flat, so I apologize for that. Now, this practical application fundamentally is that with a comparison, you're able to just decide where somebody might have done some damage, where somebody might have caused a condition to be imposed and such like. Now, are there any open world or infinite options beyond the quantum die rolling? Yes. When you have a mechanism that says that a die roll doesn't generate one number, but it generates potentially 3 others or 4 others, depending on how you look at it, you are providing a mechanic that could be used in any game. Imagine if instead of rolling a d6 and being forced to move onto boardwalk, perhaps you moved slightly short of boardwalk or slightly higher than boardwalk, in which case you've changed the dynamics of how you play the game overall. And other games of similar nature change that a lot. Things like Sorry or Parcheesi, where the die roll matters on how many spaces you get to move. Having a multiple platform system and an open a quantum die rolling mechanism, then you are able to produce all kinds of new variable decision making situations. And this therefore opens the door to all kinds of new ways of looking at gameplay and looking at how we interact with the world, because the one and done die roll against a target is so antique, it's so ancient that it doesn't even catch the reality of how we perceive the world, because we know that with quantum computing and new mechanisms that take into account a person's relative position within the system, the quantum die rolling mechanism gives you more realism, more alternatives for interpretation of actions in a game. So therefore, it's imperative that I'm able to express to you how to use the quantum die rolling mechanism, and that's why I'm so frustrated with myself right now in terms of getting this word across. It drives me crazy, and I could do an entire rant on how difficult it is to express something that other people have never seen so that they can see it. I remember when in my childhood, here we go, back in my day, when you were outside and you were running around with your friends and it got hot and you were thirsty, you simply jumped into somebody's yard, turned on their garden hose, and got yourself a drink. I don't care where you were. This was fundamentally a global phenomenon in North America. That was just what you did. And most water back in those days was safe to drink. Most people's water bill was low enough that they weren't going to be squawking about it. Matter of fact, I had people that thanked me for it because it reminded them to water their gardens or whatever. So yes, I jumped some fences and I drank some water out of other people's garden hoses. But the point here is that somebody convinced somebody else that we needed to move to bottled water, and soon they started taking the water fountains out of practical places like gas stations and laundromats and such, because they could put a water dispensing machine and charge money for them and such like. And that decision-making process is kind of where we are with QDR, because if you have a quantum die rolling mechanism and it can change the way you play the game, then once you understand QDR, then playing a game with a flat win-loss die roll mechanism, it will feel flat. It'll feel less dynamic. It'll feel less normal. And that's where the open world and infinite options come from, is that you could use the same mechanism, although you'd have to adapt it to the dice, to play a game of Monopoly or a game of Chutes and Ladders, where there's options that you get from your die rolls. Do you move at the full rate, or do you move at the half rate, or do you move at the quarter rate? It's just so many potential ideas that it might happen, that I anticipate that there's going to be a change in the way people play everything, and that the way we look at game dynamics is going to change. And so next question is, how does QDR fit into the NycosRPG plans? Well, the QDR is instrumental in the idea of how to resolve conflict in all of NycosRPG mechanisms. And so the QDR is going to be a staple in all of the mechanisms, from dark shards to downshift to distant suns to dread signs to etc., etc., etc. There are 6 that are already on the docket for printing. There are 20 at least already developed that could be pushed forward in the short term, based on funding and those that are interested in supporting it. But the QDR, once it's understood, becomes a backbone for role playing in a completely new way, a completely efficient, smooth way of resolving any conflict in a way that makes sense and provides for additional potential that isn't there otherwise. So I've gotten here a lot faster than I thought I would, and again, I think it's probably because I'm excited about it, while I also feel like I've done an inadequate job of it, and so I will be endeavoring to do so again when I have a conversational partner who will bounce these ideas back off of me so that I can clarify them better. But I do want to mention that you can pick up a set of the Dark Shards system book rules in PDF form this Saturday morning. All you need to do is join the event at startplaying.games. That is Nykos How to Play. And that event has a very limited audience, but those persons that register to play in that Saturday morning event, it's set at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. But if you play in that event, then you will be eligible for a free copy of the Dark Shards System Book PDF. And that's everyone that participates will get the free PDF. And the PDF is the full version, not a doctored, shortened, quickie, learn how to play mechanism, but the actual rule book. And that will be provided to you via email download from the NycosRPG website. Right now, you can go there and inspect the book and purchase a copy if you so desire. And that's at NycosRPG.com. And getting your hands on the book will really help to make a lot of this more visceral and understandable. And I'm just really excited about the possibilities, and I want to get the word out there, and I'm not sure how to do so. So this video is a hope to do that. And if you like what you're seeing, make sure you let us know. Put us some comments in the chat, or in the case of when it's on YouTube, put it in the comments section. And I want to thank you for your time and effort in being here. And I will see you again on the next episode of Game Master Soapbox. This is Jonathan Albin, the Game Master J, and I will see you again next time.